1943, the war is still raging overseas. Here at home, America's industrial might remains focused on its role as the arsenal of democracy.
To make an invincible army, we need machines, trucks, planes, and tanks by tens, even hundreds of thousands.
Major factories are turning out tanks and bombers by the thousands, and our industry is also doing its part for the war effort.
To wage a desperate war, the immense resources of our industrial plant have mobilized to meet a supreme test.
Block machinery companies such as Michigan's Besser Company and Stearns Manufacturing are diverting their production lines to turn out war materials and equipment. Workers at both companies go on to earn coveted Army-Navy E awards for their dedication to the war effort. In the nation's capital, a war production board now controls the pricing and availability of building materials. Other industries such as brick and timber have strong representation in Washington. Those groups are getting a lion's share of government construction contracts. That's why in 1940, NCMA leaders moved to reorganize and strengthen. Their goal, establish the NCMA as a self-sustaining, independent organization with its own office and staff.
When you have a trade association representing an industry, it has better standing with the people and entities it needs to deal with if it is an independent organization. So for example, instead of dealing with a department of PCA, it's more formidable if you're dealing with the association for the concrete masonry industry. It gives them better standing and better influence.
In January 1943, the plan to split away from the Portland Cement Association is put into action. The NCMA taps PCA's Elmer Dienhart as its first full-time executive secretary.
He took that very seriously, and he had a very glorious career, and is well recognized for having done a lot to develop that industry and develop the independence of that standalone association. And that's why I think today we now regard him as an important figure in the concrete masonry industry.
The newly revitalized NCMA is ready for the 1943 convention at the Hotel Sherman in Chicago. The theme of the meeting is how concrete masonry manufacturers can help in the war effort. In 1944, producers begin to look ahead to peacetime. The association publishes the first edition of Masonry Pictorial, a long-running publication that highlights the best of concrete masonry. The premier edition is devoted to post-war markets for concrete masonry, noting, quote, "The concrete products industry will be ready on Victory Day. Few its problems of conversion, many its opportunities."
Throughout the world, throngs of people hail the end of the war.
When the war finally ends in 1945, the association's early optimism and planning is found to be well placed.
Need for new housing and construction of every kind is at peak level.
Don Marsh, editor of Concrete Products magazine, went into the publication's archives to review historic reports detailing Block's role in post-war construction.
In 1945, Concrete Products featured an article on post-war concrete masonry plants and noted that the industry would be entering a new era, one where the immediate future would be one of tremendous demand.
The housing boom is going to mean jobs, lots of them.
In 1946, the demand for concrete block is tremendous. A new federal housing program alone calls for 425 million units. Thanks to returning veterans receiving GI bills and easier home financing terms, America quickly enters a period of post-war prosperity.
Just as the automobile brought about a huge new industry after the last war, housing can be the big new post-war industry in our time.
This building boom leads to a rush to get into the block business. In some parts of the country, ancient hand-tamped machinery, retired decades ago, are being dusted off and returned to production.
My mother and he decided that the building industry looked pretty good after the war, and they got somewhat interested in concrete and concrete block. As best we can recall, he had a little Sears and Roebuck type machine that he made a few on to start out with. He started stacking them around the house, and people basically came in and wanted to buy them.
Popular Mechanics magazine even fuels the scramble to produce block, publishing detailed plans to make a homemade block machine.
My uncle had just come out of the Navy. He was an electrician, and my father was an accountant. And they formed a company called Foster Brothers. They had seen an article in the Popular Mechanics about people making concrete blocks. So they went into the concrete block business and they bought some old equipment, and they found out very quickly that somebody sold them a bill of goods on some really crummy equipment, and they saved up some money and they bought a machine called an FC George. It was made in Florida. I don't think they make them anymore at all.
That same story repeats itself all across the country. Individual entrepreneurs establish plants wherever raw materials can be found.
I'm third generation. It would have been my grandfathers that came over from Austria. When he first got to the country, he was in the demolition business, and then they soon got into the construction business. They continued to like the use of masonry, so they saw the need to manufacture some of their own concrete products. Local contractors kind of gave them a nice ultimatum to figure out if you either want to make concrete block or do you want to do construction.
As 1950 draws near, an estimated 5,000 concrete block plants, both large and small, are working hard to meet the staggering demand.
When they purchased half of the interest in the concrete block company, they became one of 256 concrete block companies in California and 46. Today, there's 9 of them left.
Producers quickly realized that in order to keep pace, they'll need faster, automated machinery.
Stearns was a very fast machine at that time, and also instead of an hydraulic machine or a cam-operated machine, each movement had its own gearbox driven by an electric motor. The whole machine was electric, and it was quite a popular machine on the West Coast.
Block makers also learned they'll need to improve their delivery capabilities. During this time, very few plants have paved storage areas, much less forklifts to move cubes to stockpiles and delivery trucks.
It's hard work, okay? Especially in the first 20 years that I was in the industry, because you did a lot of everything by hand.
In 1950, the atomic age arrives. Advertising of the day capitalizes on the atom as the epitome of modern progress.
Here are a couple of real space-minded travelers.
But the flip side is frightening, especially when Russia takes America by surprise, detonating their own atomic weapon. Suddenly, the very real possibility of an atomic attack grips America.
When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered.
While the Office of Civil Defense tackles educating the population about the dangers of radioactive fallout, other government agencies go even further. The Atomic Energy Commission builds a small city in the middle of a remote Nevada desert.
We begin with the question of shelter. That's the real purpose of testing these houses.
Several segments of the concrete masonry industry sponsor construction of 2 of those test homes.
A house of 8-inch concrete blocks reinforced with steel.
Built on Doomsday Drive, the lightweight block structures are part of Operation Q, an historic atomic test to be conducted northwest of Las Vegas. Both houses are left standing after the blast.
This is the house constructed of reinforced concrete blocks after the explosion.
Civil defense becomes an ingrained part of American life. It's no wonder that in 1959, the National Concrete Masonry Association gets on the bomb shelter bandwagon, first with a publication of shelter plans entitled Mr. Atom and His Sinister Blanket. It details the steps to build a fallout shelter from ordinary concrete block. In 1960, the NCMA commissions a companion film presentation, Walt Builds a Family Fallout Shelter, and places the half-hour program on television stations in several major markets.
Well, folks, I'm glad you could come down to see my fallout shelter.
Featuring retired Chicago TV presenter Walt Durbin, the host takes viewers through the process of constructing their own basement shelter. But the market for home bomb shelters quickly fizzles.
In 1962, over half the readers in a survey indicated they had sold block for fallout shelters. The survey showed that after a spike in demand, sales fell off quickly as the fad faded.
As the 1950s draw to a close, the NCMA makes a major move. It's time to leave Chicago for the nation's capital. Elmer Dienhart decides to retire rather than move to Washington. His replacement will be Walter W. Underwood, and he'll have a new title, Executive Director. The first half of the supersonic 60s is marked by economic growth and prosperity. Progress is now measured by push-button convenience, and that includes the concrete block industry. In this age of early automation, block quality is now part of the programming. Those with a special talent for production can devote their efforts to create bold new products, moving block from the mundane to the magnificent.
Versatile concrete masonry with its vast variety of shapes, sizes, colors.
Throughout this era, decorative concrete block becomes synonymous with the streamlined, space-age look of modern 1960s architecture.
Producers and their customers really wanted to look beyond gray product. They wanted texture, they wanted color, and the industry was responding.
The new design possibilities eventually become a big part of NCMA's promotional efforts.
It fed right into the architectural styles that we were seeing in the 1960s.
Shadow Wall is promoted by the NCMA as one of the first products marking block's transition from functional to fashionable. In arid climates like those in California and Florida, concrete screen block emerged, bringing privacy and striking style to homes and commercial buildings.
Screen block combined the one-two punch of functional design and eye appeal.
The association promotes another new product called split face block.
The objective to bring out the exposed element.
By 1965, there was an emerging problem. As construction takes on a cycle of uncertainty, the block industry is forced to become more and more competitive.
My name is John Walker. I work for NCMA's advertising agency in Chicago. When we went to work for you, the block business had just concluded 10 fantastic years of growth. The tremendous productive capacity brought on price competition was right out of a chapter of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations.
Membership in the association falls throughout the decade. By 1966, this slow slide in membership and revenue is taking a toll on the NCMA. In 1967, 100 key members meet in Washington, D.C. to set a new course for the future. There, the members make both personal and financial pledges to stabilize the association under Operation Commitment. By 1968, Executive Director Walter Underwood takes early retirement to join the Republican National Committee. The membership taps longtime director of the Florida Association, Paul Lenchuk, to be his successor. Don Lampus, longtime friend of Mr. Lenchuk, travels to meet with his mentor in July 2017.
He's been a great friend of mine over many years. As a matter of fact, I had the good fortune of being at a board of directors meeting of NCMA. It's actually my first board of directors meeting when they called for a vote to whether we should hire him or not. During the period of time that he was at NCMA, I spent a lot of time with him. He was a tremendous mentor.
Lenchuk's first order of business is to boost a sagging membership.
I wrote a letter to each of the members and explained what was going on. And please give me a chance to prove what we can do. Don't drop your membership.
Paul Lenchuk, looking ahead to the 1970s, tells the membership what the block industry needs is a change of attitude. We've got to start believing the fact that we have the finest building product with the greatest potential. NCMA charts a course to the 70s with a new focus on marketing and improving ways to sell the product. That's where we'll start in our next episode, as the National Concrete Masonry Association looks back on 100 years of service.